Whispers of an extinct species. For centuries, the galaxy had believed that humanity was nothing more than a forgotten tale, an extinct species, erased from history after their final war against the Dominion. The official records spoke of their annihilation, their planets burned, their fleets shattered, and their people wiped from existence. To the scholars and rulers of the Dominion, humanity was a lesson, a reminder of what happened to those who resisted the supreme power of the galaxy's greatest empire. And yet, in the shadowed corners of the universe, in the hidden archives of old civilizations, there were whispers, stories that refused to die. Legends spoke of a species unlike any other. Not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most advanced, but the most dangerous. A race that never surrendered, never stopped fighting, and never forgot a grudge. There were stories of humans surviving impossible odds, winning battles they had no right to win, and defying enemies far greater than them. But as the centuries passed, those stories became myths, and the myths faded into superstition. No one had seen a human in over 300 years. The galaxy had moved on. Until now, on the distant world of Zithar 4, a Dominion research team was excavating an ancient battlefield, a site where one of the final wars against humanity had been fought. The Dominion's archaeologists had uncovered the remains of shattered warships, long broken weapons, and rusted armor. Most of it was worthless scrap, relics of a bygone era, nothing more than souvenirs of a war that had already been won. But then, deep beneath the surface, buried under centuries of rock and dust, they found something unexpected, a distress beacon. It was old, impossibly old, yet somehow still active. At first, the researchers assumed it was just a malfunctioning piece of junk, a remnant of human technology that had somehow managed to survive all these years. But when the lead scientist, Vashik Tor, activated his scanner, his 4 hearts nearly stopped beating. The beacon wasn't just active, it was broadcasting a signal. And not just any signal. It was a human military frequency. The Dominion officials overseeing the excavation ordered immediate silence. No one was allowed to speak of what had been discovered. The beacon was to be removed, dismantled, and destroyed. No records were to be kept. No reports were to be filed. The galaxy would not know. But it was already too late. The signal had been sent, and someone had received it. Light years away, beyond the edges of Dominion-controlled space, deep in the forgotten voids where no empire dared to go, an ancient warship awoke from its slumber. Its engines, dead for centuries, roared back to life. Its systems, long silent, flickered with renewed energy. The old insignia on its hull, once thought to be erased from history, became visible once more. It bore a symbol that the galaxy had not seen in over 300 years. The insignia of the Terran Republic. Humanity was gone. That was what the Dominion had believed. That was what the galaxy had accepted as truth. But the truth was about to change, because the humans were coming back. And this time, they were not alone. The research outpost on Zithar 4 had gone silent. At first, Dominion High Command assumed it was a simple communication failure. The excavation site was located in a remote system, far from major trade routes, surrounded by unstable asteroid fields. It wasn't uncommon for outposts in such regions to experience delays in data transmissions. But as the hours turned into days and no response came from the team, concern turned into alarm. A small fleet was dispatched, a group of Dominion warships, lightly armed but fast, designed for reconnaissance and rescue missions. They arrived at Zithar 4 expecting to find a malfunctioning relay, or perhaps a minor accident among the researchers. What they found instead sent shockwaves through the Dominion's leadership. The outpost was abandoned. Not a single researcher remained. The command station was empty, the excavation tools left scattered, half buried in the sands. Meals had been left uneaten. Terminals still displayed active scans, and the distress beacon, the very thing that had caused this sudden mystery, was gone. But there was something far worse. Before the last transmission had been cut off, before the team had vanished, the outpost's automated sensors had picked up something impossible. A ship, a warship, had entered the system, appearing out of nowhere, with no prior detection, no registered hyperspace signature. And its design was ancient. Every Dominion officer aboard the rescue fleet recognized the shape, the structure, the crude but efficient build of the hull. The markings were faded, barely legible, but there was no mistaking them. It was human-made. For over 300 years, humanity had been classified as extinct. Their fleets were destroyed. Their planets had been taken, repurposed, or left to rot. Their people had been wiped from existence. Yet now, in the middle of Dominion space, a human warship had appeared from nowhere. How was it possible? The Dominion commander, High Captain Selvarek, wasted no time. A full fleet-wide lockdown was initiated. No outgoing transmissions were allowed. No data was to be leaked beyond the system. The High Command needed to know what had happened, but the rest of the galaxy could not. And then the sensors picked up something even worse. The human warship wasn't alone. At first, it was just one ship, a relic from the past, a ghost of a long-dead species. But as the Dominion warships prepared to scan the wreckage, as they moved into a standard formation to investigate the abandoned outpost, something emerged from the darkness of space. Multiple hyperspace signatures flared to life. More ships, more human ships. They weren't broadcasting any known signals. They weren't responding to hails. They weren't following standard fleet formations. They moved like predators, silent, precise, closing in from every direction. The Dominion fleet had walked into a trap. High Captain Selvarek's mandibles clicked in frustration. This wasn't possible. This wasn't possible. Humanity was gone. The Dominion had erased them from existence. There were no surviving warships, no remnants of their once feared fleets, no hidden colonies that could have rebuilt in secret. And yet, the evidence was right in front of them. The ships were real. The threat was real. And the Dominion fleet was outnumbered. Selvarek gave the order to retreat. This was not a battle they were prepared for. They needed to leave. Now. But before his fleet could jump to hyperspace, before they could escape the system, the Dominion's worst nightmare became reality. The human ships opened fire. A single blast, red, searing energy, cut through the darkness, striking one of the Dominion warships with pinpoint accuracy. The shields flickered, then failed instantly. A second later, the ship exploded into a ball of fire, torn apart by a weapon far more advanced than it should have been. A weapon that should not exist. The battle had begun, and humanity had returned. Panic spread like wildfire across the Dominion fleet. The moment the first warship exploded, alarms blared, and officers scrambled to react. High Captain Selvarek's mandibles clicked in rapid bursts, a sign of deep distress. His eyes darted across the holographic display in the command center of his flagship, the Vorthalek. The human warships were not behaving like mindless remnants of a long-dead empire. They were coordinated. They moved with purpose, their formation shifting in ways that made no sense to the Dominion's tactical eye. Standard Dominion battle doctrine dictated that warships should form defensive screens, maximizing shield coverage while capital ships provided heavy firepower. But these human ghosts ignored that logic. They moved like hunters. Instead of lining up for a direct engagement, they surrounded the Dominion ships from multiple angles, cutting off escape routes and forcing them into disarray. And worst of all, their weapons were devastating. The second human volley came a moment later. The red energy blasts lanced through the void, slicing into Dominion hulls with terrifying precision. Another warship, the Corvenak, was struck. Its shields flared for a fraction of a second before collapsing entirely. The next moment, the ship ripped apart at the seams, its core detonating in a violent explosion. Selvarek felt his blood run cold. That was impossible. Dominion warships had some of the most advanced shielding in the known galaxy. Their energy barriers could withstand direct hits from planetary defense cannons. And yet, these human weapons were tearing through them like paper. The Dominion forces scrambled. Pilots launched their fighters, hoping to overwhelm the enemy with sheer numbers. But the moment the first wave of Dominion interceptors closed the distance, something horrifying happened. The human warships moved faster than expected. They anticipated the attack before it even began. They adjusted their fire, tracking the smaller fighters with pinpoint accuracy. The void lit up with a storm of red fire, and in mere moments, an entire squadron of Dominion fighters vanished into vapor. "Hi, Captain," one of the officers shouted, his voice filled with disbelief. "We're being overwhelmed. Their weapons, our shields can't hold." Zelvarek didn't need the warning. He could see it himself. The battle was no longer a fight. It was a slaughter. 3 more Dominion warships went up in flames. Some tried to return fire, but their plasma batteries did nothing. Every shot was absorbed by the armor of the human warships, and that should not have been possible. 300 years ago, when the Dominion had crushed humanity, they had studied human ships. Their armor had been strong, yes, but nowhere near indestructible. These ships were different, more advanced, more powerful, more terrifying. And then, for the first time, a human voice echoed through the Dominion fleet's communication systems. A single transmission. A voice speaking a language that had not been heard in 3 centuries. "Run." Zelvarek's blood froze. It was a warning. Not a demand for surrender. Not an offer of negotiation. Just a warning. As if the humans weren't even taking them seriously. As if they were merely toying with them. But Zelvarek was no fool. He knew when a battle was lost. His instincts screamed at him. They had to escape. Now, with a sharp movement of his clawed hand, he activated the emergency retreat protocols. Every remaining Dominion ship received the same order: jump to hyperspace immediately. Engines roared. The stars around them distorted as hyperspace drives powered up. But the humans had one final message before they left. Their warships ceased fire, as if letting them flee was intentional. And just before the Dominion forces escaped, before the void of space swallowed them whole, one last message appeared on their screens. A single image. A symbol burned into Dominion history. A human flag. The Dominion's greatest fear had come true. Humanity had returned. And this time, they were stronger than ever before. The silence aboard the Dominion flagship, Vorthalak, was deafening. High Captain Zelvarek stood frozen, his claws tightening into a fist. The image of the human flag still hovered on the main display, glowing with an eerie defiance. It was as if the long-dead species had left a message, an undeniable fact burned into the very fabric of space. Humanity had returned. But how? The Dominion had ensured their complete extinction centuries ago. They had burned their worlds, shattered their fleets, and erased every trace of human civilization. There was no way they could have survived. And yet, those warships had been real. Their weapons had been real. The Dominion fleet had been torn apart in mere moments, with weapons unlike anything they had ever encountered. Zelvarek turned toward his officers. The entire command deck was in shock. Some were still staring at the screen, others whispering among themselves in hushed, fearful tones. "Shut it off," he barked. His voice was sharp, but it did little to mask the unease in his own mind. A trembling officer reached out and terminated the display, but the image of the human flag still lingered in their minds. Zelvarek took a deep breath. He needed answers. Immediately. "Communications," he snapped, turning to the officer responsible for fleet-wide transmissions. "Get me a direct line to the Dominion High Council. Now." The officer hesitated, his mandibles twitching. "Yes, sir. If we report this, they will." Zelvarek slammed a clawed fist onto the command console. "I said now." The officer flinched but obeyed, his hands moving rapidly over the controls. A moment later, the holographic projection of Chancellor Verkalik flickered into existence. The aging, four-eyed leader of the Dominion Council narrowed his gaze, his scaled brow furrowing. "This better be urgent, High Captain," Verkalik said, his voice heavy with authority. "You were assigned to suppress insurrection forces. Why have I received reports of severe losses in your fleet?" Zelverik's throat felt dry. He had fought in dozens of campaigns, seen entire planets reduced to rubble, but never had he felt this kind of dread before. "There is no insurrection, Chancellor," he said slowly, measuring each word. "The reports are correct. We have suffered massive casualties." Verkalik's gaze darkened. "From whom?" Zelverik hesitated. Even now, the words felt impossible to say. And yet, humans. The council chamber went silent. Verkalik's expression did not change, at first. Then, slowly, his mandibles twitched. His reptilian pupils contracted into thin slits. "That," the Chancellor said, his voice dangerously low, "is not possible." "I saw them," Zelverik said firmly. "We all saw them." He gestured toward the other officers. The Chancellor's gaze flickered across the command deck, taking in the silent, shaken expressions of the Dominion's best military minds. Zelverik stepped forward, his claws gripping the edge of the display console. "We encountered a fleet of human warships in the Kelmar expanse. They moved with inhuman precision, Chancellor. Their ships were faster than ours, more advanced than anything we've ever faced. They tore through our defenses with ease. Our shields, our strongest defenses, meant nothing to them." Verkalik's eyes narrowed. "You expect me to believe that a species we wiped out 3 centuries ago suddenly returned? That they now wield weapons beyond even our comprehension?" Zelverik's jaw tightened. "I don't expect you to believe anything, Chancellor. But if you refuse to acknowledge the truth, then you are dooming us all." The room fell into silence. For a long moment, the Chancellor remained motionless. Then, slowly, he exhaled through his nostrils, his gaze dark and unreadable. "Send me all battle recordings immediately," he ordered. "Every scan, every transmission, every sensor reading. If what you say is true, then we need to know exactly what we're dealing with." Zelverik nodded. He turned to his officers, and within moments, the data was being relayed to the Dominion High Council. But deep in his mind, he already knew what the Chancellor would see. He knew that the humans had not simply returned. They had come back stronger, more dangerous, more ruthless than ever before. And worst of all, they weren't here for diplomacy. They were here for revenge. The transmission ended, but the silence in the Dominion war room remained. Zelverik stared at the blank screen, knowing full well what was happening behind the scenes. The High Council would not accept this truth easily. They would argue, they would deny, they would waste precious time trying to convince themselves that it was a trick, a deception, some elaborate hoax. But deep inside, Zelverik knew that every one of them felt it. The creeping, paralyzing fear that had gripped his own chest the moment he saw those human warships appear from the darkness. The officers around him stood in stunned silence, their minds racing. No one wanted to speak the words, but the thought was already there. If the High Council refused to act quickly, the Dominion could be doomed. Every species under their rule, every world, every fleet, they had all been built on the assumption that humanity was gone forever. That assumption was now shattered. Zelverik exhaled slowly, forcing himself to focus. His instincts, honed by years of war and conquest, screamed that action had to be taken immediately. If the Dominion delayed, if they hesitated even for a moment, the humans would take full advantage. They had already proven that their technology was beyond anything the Dominion had ever faced. Their ships moved like ghosts, striking with pinpoint accuracy and vanishing before countermeasures could even be deployed. They had done more damage in a single battle than any known enemy had in an entire war. A low chime echoed through the war room, and the tactical officer quickly turned toward the main display. Incoming transmission. Not from the High Council. from one of their remaining patrol fleets. Zelverik straightened. Perhaps more survivors had managed to escape the slaughter. He gave a sharp nod. Put it through. The screen flickered to life, and the moment the image appeared, Zelverik knew something was very, very wrong. The officer on the other end was wounded, his uniform torn, blood dripping from a fresh gash on his forehead. His breathing was heavy, frantic, and behind him, the dim emergency lights cast deep shadows over a bridge that looked half destroyed. Smoke curled in the air. Sparks flickered from ruined consoles. "This is Captain Drexhall of the 4th Patrol Fleet." The officer's voice was hoarse, desperate. "Hi, Captain. We made contact with them." He swallowed hard, and for the first time, Zelverik saw something he had never seen in a Dominion officer before. Pure, unfiltered terror. They aren't just fighting us. They're hunting us. Zelverik's blood ran cold. Drexhall sucked in a ragged breath. "We attempted to regroup after the first attack. We tried to fall back to defensive positions in Sector 12. We thought we were safe. We thought they had left." His mandibles quivered. But they didn't leave. They waited. A deep, suffocating silence filled the war room. "They let us gather our remaining forces," Drexhall continued, his voice shaking. "They let us believe we had time. Then they struck again, harder, smarter. They didn't just disable our ships this time. They destroyed them completely. They left no survivors." Zelverik's claws dug into the metal armrest of his chair. "How many ships?" Drexhall let out a bitter, broken laugh. "The entire fleet." His voice cracked. "Sir, I barely escaped. There's nothing left. They are toying with us, studying us. They know our tactics better than we do." The weight of those words settled over the entire room. Zelverik inhaled deeply, pushing back the rising panic. His mind moved quickly, assembling the pieces. This was no simple war. The humans weren't just returning to reclaim lost territory. They weren't here to negotiate, and they weren't interested in coexistence. This was annihilation. And the worst part was that the Dominion still didn't understand their enemy. He turned back toward the transmission. "Captain Drexhall, what do you mean when you say they know our tactics?" Drexhall's face twisted, his eyes dark with fear. "They predict every move before we make it. They cut off our escape routes before we even consider retreat. They disrupt our supply lines without leaving a trace. It's as if they have already fought this war before and are simply reliving a battle they already won." He shook his head slowly. "We never had a chance." The connection began to flicker. Damage to Drexhall's ship was likely interfering with the signal. His voice grew weaker. "Sir, listen to me. You have to warn the Dominion. We are not dealing with the same humans from the past. They are something else now. Something worse. They've spent centuries preparing for this moment." The screen crackled, and his last words came through, barely audible over the distortion. "They don't fear us." Then the signal cut out. The silence in the war room felt like a physical weight pressing down on Zelverik's chest. The other officers stood motionless, the horror of the situation sinking in. For centuries, the Dominion had believed itself to be the pinnacle of power, the rulers of the stars. They had built their empire on the ashes of weaker civilizations. They had believed they were invincible. But now the forgotten ghosts of a supposedly extinct species had returned, not as survivors, not as refugees, but as executioners. Zelverik's claws flexed. No more hesitation. No more waiting for orders from the High Council. If the Dominion was to survive, they had to act now. He turned sharply to his officers, his voice like steel. "Send out a full fleet-wide alert. Every available warship is to prepare for immediate deployment. We must regroup and assess their weaknesses before it's too late." One of the officers hesitated. "Sir, what if they have no weaknesses?" Zelverik's expression darkened. That was the one question he did not want to answer. But deep inside, he already feared the truth. If the humans had truly spent centuries preparing for this war, then the Dominion was already doomed. The war room of the Dominion's high command was no longer a place of control and strategy. It had become a chamber of fear. The transmission from Captain Drek's hull had spread like wildfire, igniting panic across the Dominion's leadership. Every admiral, every general, every high-ranking official had seen the raw terror in his eyes before the signal was lost. The humans weren't just fighting them. They were dismantling them piece by piece, like predators cornering weakened prey. Zelverek stood at the center of the chamber, his claws gripping the edges of the strategy table. His mind raced, trying to calculate their next move, but the truth was clear. The Dominion had lost control. Their fleets were being annihilated before they could even react. Every attempt to regroup had ended in disaster. The humans were always one step ahead, always predicting their strategies, always striking where they were weakest. His officers stood around him, silent, waiting for orders that might not even matter. Some looked to him with desperate hope, others with barely contained despair. An officer hesitated before speaking, his voice tight. "High Captain, our intelligence reports indicate that the humans have begun targeting our supply routes. They are systematically cutting off every major hub. If this continues, we will be paralyzed." Zelverek finished, his voice heavy. A grim silence followed. The Dominion had always prided itself on its overwhelming power. Their empire stretched across hundreds of systems. Their fleets were unmatched. Their technology advanced beyond most known civilizations. And yet, against the humans, none of it mattered. Their greatest strength, their ability to dominate through sheer force, was now their greatest weakness. Another officer, her mandibles clicking anxiously, stepped forward. "Sir, we must contact the High Council. If we are to survive this, we need a coordinated response. Every fleet, every ship, every—" "They won't listen." Zelverek's voice was cold. He knew the truth. The High Council had spent too many years believing in their own superiority. They still clung to the illusion that the Dominion was unbreakable. They would refuse to acknowledge the full extent of the threat until it was too late. The officer stiffened. "Then what do we do, sir? If the Council won't act, and if our fleets are being torn apart, we find their weakness." Zelverek turned sharply to the intelligence officer. "What do we know about their movements, their patterns? There must be something they rely on, something we can use against them." The intelligence officer hesitated before pulling up a holographic display. Red markers blinked across the map, each one a confirmed attack site. Their attacks are calculated. They never strike randomly. They disable communications first, isolate the fleet, and then eliminate it completely. He exhaled slowly. It's almost as if they are following a plan that was set long before the war even started. Zelverek narrowed his eyes. "A plan." The officer nodded grimly. "It's not just strategy. It's precision. They knew exactly where to hit us. They understood our defense grids, our response times, even the way our captains think. This is not an enemy learning as they fight. This is an enemy that already knows how this war will play out." The word sent a chill through the room. Zelverek's claws tightened. "How?" The officer hesitated, then pulled up another set of data. "We analyzed recovered wreckage from one of our destroyed fleets. The human weapons, there's something strange about them. They don't just disable our ships. They are designed to surgically eliminate command structures, power systems, and communications. They neutralize resistance before the battle even begins." A low murmur rippled through the officers. Zelverek leaned in. "You're saying they have intelligence on us? That they knew about our systems before they even returned?" The officer nodded slowly. "Sir, it's more than just intelligence. It's almost as if they have fought us before." A heavy silence fell over the war room. The idea was impossible, unthinkable. The humans had been gone for centuries. The Dominion had never fought them in a full-scale war. And yet, Zelverek's mind raced. Could it be? Had the humans prepared for this moment long before anyone in the Dominion had even considered them a threat? Had they spent centuries studying, calculating, adapting? A chilling thought gripped him. What if the humans had been watching them this whole time? The realization sent a jolt through him. He turned sharply to the communications officer. "Send a message to all remaining fleets. Order them to change their tactics immediately. No more predictable formations. No more standard defensive grids. They must assume that the humans already know their every move." The officer hesitated. "Sir, what if that doesn't work?" Zelverik's voice was quiet, but firm. "Then we have already lost." The chamber was silent, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone present. The Dominion had always been the hunters, the conquerors, the ones who dictated the rules of war. But now, for the first time in history, they were the prey. And the hunters had returned. The final battle had begun. The Dominion's last fleet, the remnants of an empire that once ruled countless systems, gathered in a desperate attempt to make a final stand. Thousands of warships, dreadnoughts, and planetary defense platforms were positioned across the Velos system, one of the last strongholds left under their control. Zelverik stood on the bridge of the Dominion flagship, his eyes fixed on the void ahead. His body was tense, his mind calculating every possible outcome. He had ordered his forces to abandon all conventional tactics. The humans knew how they fought, how they thought, how they reacted. That knowledge had given them an overwhelming advantage in every battle so far. But now, Zelverik had no intention of playing by their rules. "Sir, enemy fleet incoming," an officer announced, her voice tight with fear. "Multiple formations detected. They are approaching from all vectors." Zelverik's claws dug into the command console, patched the feed to the main display. The massive holoscreen flickered to life, revealing a sight that sent a ripple of unease through the entire bridge crew. The human fleet had arrived. They did not come in scattered waves or divided squadrons. They came as a single, unstoppable force, a coordinated wall of destruction, their warships moving in eerie synchronization. Their flagship, a behemoth unlike anything seen before, led the charge, its hull blackened by centuries of battle, its weapons brimming with power beyond Dominion comprehension. The humans had no need for intimidation tactics. Their presence alone was enough to send fear spiraling through the Dominion ranks. Zelverik forced himself to stand firm. "Prepare all weapons, shields at maximum. Order our forces to engage on my command." For a moment, silence fell across the battlefield. Then the storm erupted. The first wave of human attacks struck like a hammer. Dominion cruisers exploded in brilliant bursts of fire, their shields shattered in an instant. Plasma beams and kinetic railguns tore through their defenses, cutting through even their heaviest warships like paper. Fighters swarmed the battlefield, moving with terrifying precision, slipping through gaps in the Dominion's formations as if they had already mapped out their every maneuver. Zelverik clenched his jaw. This wasn't just overwhelming firepower. It was something more. It was knowledge. The humans knew exactly where to hit, how to strike, when to pressure, and when to withdraw. Every attempt to counter their assault was met with instant adaptation, as if the humans had already fought this battle 1,000 times before. "Enemy forces are breaching our right flank," an officer shouted. "Reinforce with the heavy destroyers," Zelverik ordered. The Dominion warships moved into position, forming an unbreakable defensive wall. But before they could even fire, the humans adjusted. Bombers appeared from seemingly nowhere, slipping through the chaos and targeting critical engines, power cores, and command bridges. In seconds, the right flank crumbled, warships left adrift or detonating into nothingness. The Dominion was losing, and this time there would be no escape. A transmission came through, forcing its way onto the main display. The bridge fell silent as a human figure appeared. He was older, battle-worn, his uniform decorated with symbols that Zelverik did not recognize but somehow understood. His expression was calm, too calm for a man standing at the heart of a war. "This war is over," the human commander said. His voice was steady, unshaken. "Surrender now, and we will show mercy." Zelvarek bared his teeth, his mind screaming in defiance. But deep inside he knew there was no victory to be had here. The humans had returned not as survivors, not as refugees seeking justice, but as executioners delivering the final judgment. His officers turned to him, waiting for his decision. If he ordered them to fight, they would die. If he surrendered, the Dominion's rule would end, their species reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale in history. He stared at the human commander, searching for something. Weakness, hesitation, doubt. He found none. His claws retracted, his shoulders slumping ever so slightly. "Stand down," he ordered. His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried through the entire bridge. "Send the surrender signal." A heavy silence filled the room. Then, one by one, the Dominion warships powered down their weapons, their shields lowering. Across the battlefield, the message spread. The war was over, and the humans had won. The human commander gave a small nod, as if he had expected this all along. Then the transmission cut out, and the battlefield fell still. Zelvarek felt his body grow heavy. This was what it felt like to be on the losing side of history. This was what it felt like to face an enemy that had never truly been defeated, only waiting. The legends had spoken of humans, of their strength, their resilience, their unbreakable will. But the Dominion had not listened, and now they would pay the price for their arrogance.